Great. I will lead us off and welcome everyone. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We actually don't have a quorum just yet. Mark Carrera, Omar, I see you're in the process of logging in. We can't see you yet, but hopefully in a moment. Don Dickinson.
Here.
Paul Fordham is excused. Linda Jackson.
Here.
Lorenzo Jones.
Here.
Cesar Lagleva. Amy Lykover.
Here.
Diana Lopez will be a little bit late. I see Rena Lopez is joining us right now. Welcome.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Rena.
Getting off from work.
Great. Glad you're here. And John Previtali.
Here.
Daniel Ryan.
Here.
And Tom Monahan is not here. And Joanne Webster.
I am here.
Great. Okay. At this point, we are going to see if we can accept the meeting summary of June 30th, which is the last meeting of the working group. Are there any comments or changes to the minutes of that meeting or the summary of that meeting? Yes, Amy?
I'm not sure if this was the meeting that you asked for suggestions for your public presentations.
Yes.
All right, because you didn't include my suggestion.
Okay.
Which-
Can you repeat what that was so we can go back and annotate that?
Sure. I suggested including a slide of by neighborhoods or of neighborhoods with the demographics in order to demonstrate affirmatively furthering neighborhood, integration or neighborhood fair housing.
Okay.
That was my suggestion. I thought it would bring the message home to neighbors.
Great, thank you. We'll go back and note that was suggested at that meeting on those minutes. Are there any other changes or comments on that? And so I'm going to ask, with that edit that we'll make, would someone like to move approval of the meeting summary?
I'm happy to move the approval of the meeting summary.
Thank you, Joanne. Is there a second for that?
I'll second, Lorenzo.
Thank you, Lorenzo. So those all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
We will go ahead and make the edit and post those meetings. At this point, we are looking to see if we have any members of the public who would like to speak during our open comment period, public comment period. And I don't see any attendees right now. We had 2, but they were members. So we will have another opportunity for public comment later in the meeting if we do have any public attending. So we would ordinarily go to our director's remarks. Right now, our director is unable to be here this evening. So Allie sends her regrets to everyone. And we would like to move right on to the summary of the July 14th and August 16th meeting. I'll just say before we do that, the overall agenda for this meeting is really focused on one topic. So Alexis is going to do an overview of the 2 community workshops we held in July and August and kind of what we took away from that. And then we have a presentation, a fairly short presentation that really just tees up some discussion topics for the group. And we'll talk more about where we are in the development of our housing policies and programs when we get to that item. But that's really the focus of the remainder of this meeting. And we hope to get through as many of the topics as possible that were in the PowerPoint that we sent out in advance. And then we have, again, just a quick opportunity for announcements at the end of the meeting before we close. So we do hope to spend as much of the meeting as possible on those policy topics. Are there any questions about the agenda before I turn it over to Alexis for item 5B? Great, thank you. Go ahead, Alexis, thanks.
Okay,
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I just want to do sort of a quick overview of the 2 evening community workshops that the city hosted in mid-July and mid-August. So in mid-July, the workshop focused on gathering input on the draft housing opportunity sites. And so for both of these workshops, the general format was a welcome and a sort of informational presentation. And then community members divided into breakout groups to provide additional inputs. And both workshops included a breakout group that was facilitated in Spanish. For the July 14th workshop, we actually didn't have a lot of comments on specific sites. However, there were comments on interconnected issues such as the impact on schools, water, and other infrastructure. There were a number of comments in general on the need for more affordable housing. People were very interested in transit and sort of connected, like housing being connected to different modes of transportation and transit opportunities. And then policies and programs came up. So some of the same issues and challenges that came up in workshop 2 around, what's important to people. So I'll kind of cover those as part of the August 16th workshop, which focused on housing policies and programs. And I know I saw a couple of you at each of these workshops, so thank you. It was really nice to have your presence there. The way that this presentation was done will be kind of similar to what we're going to do tonight. There were 8 sort of housing, broad housing topics. And we presented those and asked participants to submit feedback in the chat. And then we broke into breakout groups and dug a little deeper into the comments that folks provided in the chat and things that they wanted to talk about, sort of their priority topic areas. One thing I'll say is that it was a really well-attended meeting. We had 3 times the number of people that we had at the July workshop, and it's sort of the best attendance that I've seen at a city meeting in my sort of year at the city. So I think that really demonstrated the importance and interest for community members on this topic. And also thank you to our partners, all of you and folks who helped us get the word out about the workshop. So I think some of the key topics that really resonated and came up with folks are ones that we've also talked about in this group. So tenant protections was a huge topic, both tenant education, education for landlords, rent control, the right to counsel, and then fair housing issues measures came up as well. So interest in, should there be a higher percentage of inclusionary housing, and creating a grant or loan program for down payments. So there was kind of a whole range that came up. I'm not going to go through all of them, but we sent out the 2 summaries earlier today, and I really encourage you to skim through those because I think it was just a really, really rich conversation. The last kind of major bucket that I want to mention is housing safety and quality. So code enforcement and inspections was a major topic area, with people requesting increased frequency of inspections and enforcement. So I will pause there and see if either Barry or Liz or anyone else who was at those workshops wants to chime in on any impressions they had or things that they want to highlight.
Yeah, I would just add that I thought it was significant that we had a larger number of folks in the Spanish speaking breakout group than we did in the English speaking breakout groups. And it's the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I think we were hearing from folks who we haven't heard from before on topics that we haven't necessarily been focused on. So it was really, it was good to begin to get that voice at the table. And I know some of you were there if you want to add anything or share anything else, observations or thoughts. Joanne.
Thanks, Barry. Yeah, no, I was really pleased at the attendance. One of the things that I noticed, it was a lot of our residents in our community who are renters. And I thought that was really important for that voice to be heard.
John?
Yeah, I wasn't at either of these, but I watched one of them online just before this meeting. And I thought I agree, there were some interesting points brought up that hadn't really been focused on. One woman mentioned that she felt like the downtown area where she lived was getting hotter, and suggested that we make sure that there are more trees that are planted. I love that idea, and I think it's true that cities with more trees are cooler. Parking, as we know, was also mentioned a bunch of times, and I think that's covered in the various ordinances and plans and whatnot. But I just want to make sure that we do have sufficient parking, and that there isn't overcrowding that results in more parking than expected, like there is now. So I guess that sort of connects to that inspection and compliance mention. And then the last one, which I thought was really intriguing, was a person who suggested connecting the Canal District to the downtown area through walkable and bikeable paths in a more efficient manner, more safe manner than what we have now. So those three topics particularly resonated with me.
Thank you, John. Other comments, Amy?
Thank you. And John, thanks for pointing out that comment. I might just mention what I sent to Barry today as an FYI, asking whether he might consider folding it into the housing element report, which is, it was basically all of the city policies about trees. And I'm the leader of an ad hoc tree group with the environmental leaders in Marin who are working on a tree policy in the city of San Rafael. And we urge Barry to consider including all of the connections between the climate action plan and the general plan and trees. And since residential areas are enhanced by trees, all residential areas, including a downtown area, we ask that that be included. That said, my comment was, I read the profile of the two different groups, and I guess I was wondering, I mean, even though 100 people out of a city of 60,000 people may not be a very large percentage, it's always great to see more than 15 people at a public meeting. I mean, there are city council meetings where you only have consultants and staff over and over again. So this was great. I was wondering what kind of promotion did you do for the August 16th meeting that you had so many people?
Can I just answer? I'll answer, and I want to respond to. I just want to first say to this whole group, the entire working group, who you guys know that are amazing, and the outreach efforts for work you did. Right? I mean, you embraced, you got the idea of affirmatively programming for housing. You bought into the idea of equity and including voices that have not previously been part of these conversations into the work that you're doing as part of this group and as individuals. And as I pushed out, as the city pushed out email blasts and that kind of thing, you did that work for us as well. So I would say, Amy, in response to your question, I think it was a concerted across the board effort. We did it in a different way. We identified different groups. We came up with a different strategy, including all of you, right? Asking you to be spokespeople for that. And I think as a result of that, we see what the community and what our residents are really thinking about, right? These policies and programs which Barry is going to walk us through. This is what resonated. Sites are really important. And usually what we think that we're going to get a lot of information and feedback from, but this has informed us not only about how to get more people engaged in what topics are meaningful, but that the more people that we get engaged in this process, including you, the more we advance the conversation, include more people, and have much more robust. So again, I just want to say thank you to all of you, because I know you were doing the heavy lifting. I saw all those feedbacks and I got a lot of comments back from my email. So thank you. It was your work, as well as, Barry's and Allie's and Alexis's strategy on our community engagement. Okay. Long-winded, and again, thanks to all.
Thank you. My only reason in asking was that, it's hard to compare meetings if there were different amounts of push for each meeting. And that's what I didn't know. I've noticed that there was a much greater percentage of renters in the second meeting and native Spanish speakers. And so it just seemed like there might've been different kinds of outreach. And I just thought I'd point that out.
Yeah, Alexis, did you want to add anything?
No, I would echo what Liz said. I think the other thing is just, I think we had more lead time too for the second meeting. And so I think even though we kind of did some similar things for the first meeting, we had more momentum, I think, by the time we got to mid-August. So yeah, and thank you again to everyone who forwarded to their groups. I think it really was a team effort.
Yeah.
And
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask that you include in the minutes. So Alexis and I have been writing back and forth. I asked what the third meeting was, and she wrote housing element kickoff meeting late 2021. And I wasn't quite sure if that was your presentation to the council or if it was one of these meetings.
We had a dedicated community meeting in, I believe it was mid-November, on the housing element, and we had probably 35 attendees at that meeting. It was a similar format to the meeting that we didn't do breakout groups. It was more of a town hall style Q&A meeting.
Was it Zoom?
It was on Zoom. Yeah.
Okay.
All of the meetings we've done are on Zoom. And I was just going to do a shout out to Allie as well, who worked with Voces de Canal on that last meeting. And I think her communication with that organization really helped with the turnout, particularly among renters and folks from the canal who we haven't seen before at some of these meetings.
That's great.
And I was actually wanting to see, Omar, you have your hand up, and wanted to give you a chance to comment as well.
Thank you, Barry. First of all, I want just to congratulate the staff of the city for the efforts to make sure the voices that traditionally doesn't participate in the spaces. In fact, in most of the meetings they participate with, when they are organized by the city, usually the voices that we don't see are tenants. We don't see that very often. So it was great to see at that meeting a significant number of tenants. For the population, they represent 30% of the population in the city of San Rafael, right? So that's what we always had to remind ourselves, is 30% of the residents of the canal are tenants, Latinos, and they were represented in that meeting. But again, it's a reflection of the leadership in the city that really is making an effort to include all voices in this process. I would say the other part that was done is helping the community to understand the importance of these planning exercises, right? It's usually we go to low-income communities and we tell them, hey, join a conversation about the housing element. And they were like, what is the housing element, right? Helping understand how important is these conversations, because we're gonna be providing input and guidance on decisions that will be impacting their lives for the next 10, 15, 20 years. So I think doing an extensive education to help people see, hey, the problems that you're facing today really are connecting with these planning exercises. Other people are making decisions on your behalf. So I think that was very important to close that knowledge gap. Just on the meeting itself, it was very interesting to see the majority of the participants in the meeting, they live and work in San Rafael. So we're talking about not just low-income residents, we're talking about the workforce of the city of San Rafael. And I think the Canal neighborhood has been seen as the neighborhood of poor people, but I actually think that the city should be seeing that with a completely different eyes. This is an asset that has not been capitalized. It's a loaded culture that can be celebrated. The Latino culture is there. It could become a destination for Marin County, for the city of San Rafael. Considering that we have a county, the tourism is one of the main industries here. I think it's time for us to think what can we do to improve the conditions of the Canal neighborhood to become a destination for residents of San Rafael and the county and outside. So once again, thank you to the staff. Thank you for all your efforts and for understanding how important it is to include all voices in these planning processes, because you guys are leading, I think in the county, you're leading this work. Everybody's looking at San Rafael as what is going to be an inclusive process will look in the future. And I think that is very exciting times for all of us to be here and be part of it.
Thank you, Omar. Great. Any other comments before we move on to the next item? Okay. I don't see any hands up. Great. So I'm going to share my screen, and we have a presentation. You know, we debated the best way to engage the working group in the conversation and opted for get the presentation out of the way up front and then spend the meeting having a conversation versus keeping the screen in PowerPoint mode and asking you to comment on things while they're on the screen, because I think it's good for us to see each other since we can't do it in person, at least on our screens. So we're going to go through 8 different topic areas, and then at the end, we're going to come back without PowerPoint on the screen. And Alexis, I don't see chat on here on my menu. I don't know if that's for everybody or.
It's not on mine either.
I think
No.
I think it's disabled for this type of meeting.
Okay, so
As a
we
UI.
we were going to enable the chat for folks to weigh in on. So so what we've done is we've taken the presentation that we did at the August 16th meeting and adapted it for the working group. Some of you have already seen parts of this before. We're going to go through a number of topic areas and provide some ideas for new programs, and then give everyone a chance to talk about these programs at the end of the presentation. So just to recap, I think this slide may have been in an earlier presentation. In the housing element, we have goals which are very broad aspirational statements, and then each of those goals has a series of policies which are a little bit more focused and directed. And then we have programs, which are the most specific aspect of the housing element. And these are the specific actions that the city is pledging to take over the next 8 years as it implements its housing element. So things like our inclusionary zoning program, or our rent mediation program, or the apartment inspection program, those are examples of what those are. For each of the programs, we, under state law, we have to develop an objective. And ideally, that's something that can be measured. So as part of this process, we're going through all of the existing programs, we're updating them, we're replacing them, we're adding new programs, and we're creating these numeric objectives wherever we can. So in the existing housing element, there are 49 programs dealing with a long list of topics, and you see some of them here on the screen. We're not throwing the existing list away or starting from scratch. I think the important thing here is many of these programs are still in effect. They're still viable and valid. They still provide great benefits. So I think in an earlier meeting, walked you through the programs and gave you our evaluation of how they would be carried forward in the new housing element. For the most part, we're sticking with that original evaluation, but I think this is also an opportunity to take a step back and look at a higher level about how we're doing on all of these different programs in the aggregate. So there are a few slides that go over some of the accomplishments since 2015 when the last housing element was adopted. These are things we said we were going to do in the previous housing element that we've either done or are in the process of doing, or they're ongoing. First, there was the new downtown zoning, the form-based zoning code that was adopted last year. This was the downtown precise plan, which created the capacity for a significant amount of additional housing in downtown, subject to new rules and regulations that are more flexible, that provide more opportunity for some creative design and so forth. We have adopted new rules for accessory dwelling units that were required by state law, but those are now in effect, and we're seeing a pretty dramatic increase in the production of ADUs across the city. The city adopted short-term rental policies. When that showed up in the last housing element, short-term rentals were still kind of a new thing. I'm not sure what the effect was going to be on the rental housing market, but within the first couple of years, the city did adopt short-term rental policies so that they don't begin to consume part of our rental housing stock. There was approval of the rent review and mandatory mediation program, which gives landlords and tenants the opportunity to negotiate in the event of rent increases that exceed 5%. Through a professional mediator. There's financial assistance to create new affordable housing. These are housing projects that were funded in part by local contributions through our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The city facilitated the renovation of existing affordable housing, the Center Point Apartments in downtown San Rafael being an example of that. There were expanded renter protection measures, and some of these came about because of new state laws. AB 1482, which was passed a couple of years ago, includes a number of measures for renter protection. At the end of the day, the city permitted 388 additional housing units between 2015 and the end of 2021. So that's 7 years out of the 8-year RHNA cycle. The assignment for the cycle that we're in now was 1,007 units. So obviously we didn't, we produced less than 40%. But with a year to go, maybe there will be some more units permitted in 2022. 115 of the units that were permitted serve lower income households, and 273 serve moderate and above moderate income households. So this again demonstrates that it's much easier to produce those above moderate income households. That's what the market basically drives, and that the subsidies that are necessary to provide the lower income housing units are really not sufficient at the current time. Other accomplishments, there were a number of forums that were convened with developers and our community members to look at barriers to building housing. Particularly in 2019 and early 2020, the previous community development director convened a number of forums with developers to talk about what are the obstacles to building housing in the city. And there were a number of reforms and changes that were made following that series of workshops and conversations with our city council, including the update of the inclusionary zoning regulations. This is reducing the percentage of units in new development that need to be reserved for below market rates. Changes to the design review board structure and the way that projects are reviewed to make it a little quicker and more efficient. Updates to the density bonus ordinance. Again, the state law changed a number of times during the housing element period, and that required that we improve and update our density bonus regulations to provide additional incentives for affordable housing. There was streamlining of the pre-application process. The city council adopted a policy resolution for how local housing trust fund money, these are the funds that accrue from development impact fees for affordable housing and from developers who choose not to build the housing on site. So that basically guides how that funding, how those funds are spent. And then the designation of Northgate Town Center and Southeast San Rafael as priority development areas. This is basically signaling that these are areas where the city wants to see new housing and reinvestment. It basically creates a foundation for us to get grant money, planning grant, infrastructure grant, transportation grant money from ABAG and from MTC to help us invest in those areas and facilitate development in the next few years. So we've also faced challenges since 2015. We've talked a lot at this working group about these challenges. We have still seen home prices and rents rising faster than income, and economic growth outpacing housing production. In spite of a pandemic, we're still growing jobs faster than growing housing. We've seen that constrained funding in our local housing program. We've talked at this working group about issues with tax credits. Labor and construction costs are high and really have increased a great deal in the last 3 years. There have been economic challenges associated with COVID-19, both short-term and longer term, now that we're adjusting to kind of a new normal in terms of our work patterns and how we live and work and dine out and shop and so forth. And we continue to be constrained by limited land supply and the fact that many of our sites, although we have a large number of sites, many of them are not vacant, and we don't have all the tools in our toolbox to facilitate their redevelopment. So those are some challenges. So what we're doing now is really setting the stage for moving forward to the next housing element. We've started to draft the policies, programs, the goals, policies, and programs. And there are a few that are mandatory. So we actually, under state law, we have to include a program to adopt objective design standards that allow for streamlined approval of housing development, so that we basically can't really say a project can only be approved if it's compatible with the neighborhood, unless we define what does compatible mean. Is it 35 feet? Is it 45 feet? Is it a certain style of architecture and so forth? So those objective design standards they've been developed downtown, but we still need to adopt them for other parts of the city. Carryover sites, if we're required by state law to provide certain streamlining allowances for any sites in our housing element that were listed in the last housing element. Low barrier navigation centers. This is a form of emergency shelter that we're required to permit by right in mixed use zoning districts, state law, AB 101. The SB 9, which some of you are familiar with and have heard about, it's just recently been codified in an ordinance adopted by council. It's a state law that requires that we allow single family property owners meeting certain criteria to divide their lots and create additional dwelling units. There's also, I believe it's SB 329, which says that landlord cannot discriminate against a tenant based on their source of income. So you can no longer have an advertisement for a rental unit that says no Section 8. That is illegal under current state law. These are new programs that we're required to include in our element. And we know that there's a much bigger focus in this element on fair housing. And I think all of us are going into this. These are a lot of new laws that we're fortunate in that Southern California cities are a year ahead of us in their housing elements. So we're seeing what is working in terms of getting these documents certified by the state, by looking at what some of those communities are doing and trying to learn both from their successes and their mistakes in the way we structure our housing element. But some of this is new for all of us, not just in Marin, but basically, all of the jurisdictions across California are doing this for the first time, hoping that the state will agree that we've met the intent of the law. So this is the first of the 8 issues. This has come up throughout this process, the issue of tenant protection measures. And what we're doing right now in San Rafael is limiting rent increases based on state law. I mentioned the mandatory mediation program, just cause for eviction measures. Again, this is required by new law, AB 1482, but the city of San Rafael has adopted its own just cause for eviction ordinance that goes a bit beyond what the state requires. Increasing tenant relocation allowances. This is in the current housing element, it's basically saying that if you evict a tenant for no fault eviction because the owner wants to move back into the unit or take it off the market, that you are responsible for paying a portion of the tenant's relocation expenses. So some of the ideas to consider and some of what's been suggested in this process are more programs to limit rent increases and protect tenants from eviction, and more efforts to ensure that tenants are secure in their housing. And I will say that one of the things the city and other cities in Marin County received is a letter with multiple signatories, some of whom are here on in this working group, asking for a tenant bill of rights to be part of the new housing element that includes a number of additional measures that would create more stability for tenants. It is not without controversy because I think there's a landlord and developer and homeowner, I shouldn't say homeowner, apartment owner perspective that also would be weighed in thinking through how we would incorporate this language in the housing element. So we are moving toward a program in the housing element that at least continues this discussion about additional tenant protections without necessarily saying we're going to do A, B, C, and D immediately or by 2023. I think the important thing here is that we're creating, we're making a value statement that this is important to us, and we will continue to work with our landlords and our tenants and our advocacy groups to develop solutions that work.
Ben, you want us to hold our questions till the end, correct?
Yeah, and hold that thought. I'm going to try to get through all 8 of these. This is number 2. So fair housing measures, these are measures that ensure that our residents don't face discrimination or are denied access to housing because of race, ethnicity, age, ability, and other protected criteria. We do have inclusionary housing measures that require affordable units to be located in all new market rate development. So that is a fair housing measure in and of itself. We contract with Fair Housing Advocates of Northern California to administer a fair housing program, and that includes counseling, education, and enforcement. We talked about the source of income protection, but some ideas that have come up for consideration are really amping up our current efforts and doing additional enforcement, additional outreach and education, maybe to some groups we haven't reached in the past, like our HOAs or our landlords and owners, our realtors who may not be aware of some of the fair housing rules. So quite a bit on just also understanding the history of housing discrimination covenants and codes and restrictions that existed in San Rafael and other Marin communities until the Fair Housing Act was approved 50 years ago, but there's still maybe other forms of discrimination that we can look at. So we are looking for additional program ideas on how we can improve fair housing in the city. And I think we heard a lot about this at our workshop, but we're looking for some additional direction and guidance. Maintaining housing health, safety, and quality. So these are what we're doing right now. Again, we have a pretty robust code enforcement program. We have, when a building is put up for sale, there's an inspection, the residential building record inspection that looks back on all the permits that have been pulled for that property, makes sure that work has been done with permits in the past, and that there are no violations. There's a program to inspect all rental apartments at least once every 5 years. And there's a residential rehabilitation loan program. And this really is an opportunity for lower income homeowners to have a source of low interest loans to help them improve their homes, maintain their homes, and correct any deficiencies that they might not be able to afford otherwise. It's a county program that the city participates in. It's a great program, but funding is pretty limited to cover all the needs. So ideas to consider: continuing monitoring the building. So we're going to keep doing what we're doing basically, but we're looking at what additional programs can we explore or develop to protect our residents against things like flooding, or we at this working group have talked about the need for air filtration and air quality improvements for housing near freeways, or programs to deal with insects or rodents and so forth, which we've heard from in our community engagement is an issue. But this is also, when we're talking about housing health, safety, and quality, it's also an opportunity to make our housing more sustainable, more energy efficient, and more in line with our climate goals. So there's also this topic covers many aspects of housing quality. Next is programs to increase the housing supply. And I think it's worth noting here that, you know, we're building about 55 housing units a year in San Rafael based on the last 7 years of data. And that, by the way, includes accessory dwelling units. So 55 units a year, and our RENA assignment is 3,200 for the next 8 years. So that's an 8-fold increase. And we're going to be hard pressed to amp up the production of housing by 800% in the city. We are implementing various state laws that require streamlining of development. We have new zoning downtown. We are allowing housing on most of our commercially zoned sites in San Rafael. And that's something that not all cities do. There are many cities that say if you're in a commercial zone, you can only build commercial land uses. We don't do that. Aggressively promoting accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwellings. We're awarding density and height bonuses to projects that include affordable units. And the city also allows reduced planning and building fees for affordable housing, which is a cost reduction. But what else can we do? Obviously, that's the big question throughout this housing element. Traditionally, this document has been about what can we do to meet that numeric target and get more housing built in our community. So we're continuing the efforts that are underway, but we're also looking at more programs to particularly to increase workforce housing that is specifically really geared toward the local workforce, people who work in local businesses. Looking at the possibility of office to housing conversions in a way we really haven't looked at before. And this is not just demolishing empty office buildings and replacing them with apartments, but converting existing office space into residential use without demolishing the building. And there are a number of those that are underway or that are proposed in the city. More housing on municipal parking lots, looking at the possibility of reducing parking requirements in particularly downtown, developing plans for North San Rafael and the Canal and Southeast areas, since they're now designated rather as priority development areas, and then streamlining of environmental review requirements and some of the other requirements. So these are areas where we feel like there's an opportunity for some additional program direction. Options for first-time home buyers. So we are encouraging residents right now, we're encouraging residents to use the county's down payment assistance program. And we're also encouraging the production of housing that's maybe a little bit more affordable for purchase by design. So condominiums tend to be more affordable than single family detached homes. There are other forms of ownership like cooperatives or homes that are prefabricated and so on that may be realistic that we can do. We're actually already doing now, but there are other things we could consider in the future. The idea of community land trusts, converting some additional rental housing stock to condominiums, particularly given the owners of those units the opportunity to own the units that they're currently renting, and then doing a better job of linking our workforce to the below market rate units in the city when they become available. These are the below market rate units that are for sale. But again, we feel that there are more programs on this topic. Options for lower income renters. So you can see on the left in the yellow box, the things that we're doing now. We are providing funds through our Housing Trust Fund to facilitate the development of affordable housing, things like the Mill Street project that opened today, the Vivillon development that's under construction now downtown, and some of the other projects that are in the pipeline, encouraging accessory dwellings, which are more affordable by design. We are currently providing opportunities for a variety of different housing types that are more affordable, such as emergency shelter, supportive and transitional housing, and the single room occupancy hotels. We're working to preserve units that are considered to be at risk because they have subsidies that may expire during the next 8 years. So these are low income housing units that are funded for a term of 55 years, where that term may be ending in the next 8 years. And we have a mobile home rent stabilization program. So some of the ideas we are looking at include what we call an acquisition and rehab program, which would assist in acquiring existing rental housing with willing sellers and converting those into affordable housing units. So that would be rehabilitation of the existing building, particularly for fourplexes, sixplexes, small apartments, and so forth, and then creating an affordable housing resource there. And then again, more promotion of accessory dwelling unit construction, possibly converting some of the older motels into affordable housing. There are a number on Lincoln Avenue, on Francisco Boulevard East, that could be potentially converted into housing. We've seen that happen in some of the adjacent cities in the county through Project Home Key, and we do have those opportunities here. The next topic is housing for older adults and persons with disabilities. This is 7, so there's one more to go after this. Right now, we have strong support in the housing element for additional senior housing and assisted living, programs to assist owners in retrofitting their homes, looking at co-housing as a model. These are opportunities for multiple households to live in independent dwelling units, but sharing common kitchen, living, and dining facilities. It's a model that exists, but in pretty limited supply. Ensuring compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act and other state building code regulations for housing that serves persons with disabilities. And then reasonable accommodation is a local ordinance that gives persons with disabilities the right to request variances from the building code and the planning code in order to adapt their units to improve their quality of life and mobility. So ideas to consider. Again, we know this is one of the fastest growing segments of our population, with more than 20% of our residents over 65, and that number is growing and will continue to grow in the next 8 years. So we're looking at what additional measures can the city take to provide more housing options for older adults and residents with disabilities. Some of the ideas have included home sharing, promoting home sharing to a greater degree than we do now. And I will share that Alexis and I actually had a meeting a few weeks ago with a home sharing vendor who said, please, can we partner with the city of San Rafael and expand this program in your community? Because we think that there's a huge untapped market for single adults, particularly seniors, but also other older adults who are living alone in large 4-bedroom homes who may benefit from home sharing. More buildings with elevators, even when they're not required by the building code, intergenerational housing where really we can accommodate multiple generations and maybe in the same family or different families, and then universal design, which the idea here is all housing is designed for persons with different abilities throughout their lives. So the last topic area, and this is really kind of the key to all of the other topic areas moving forward, is how can we generate additional funding to support these programs? We do have an affordable housing trust fund, which comes from fees that are charged against new development. We apply for state and federal grants. We participate in various county programs, and we encourage private investment. What else can we do moving forward? There's been some discussion of a county or a regional housing bond. There's a regional housing bond that's kind of percolating out there now that will likely come forward in a couple of years that will really include billions of dollars intended to promote housing, but it's not here yet. So we don't have that funding source yet. A number of cities are looking at a vacancy tax. And actually, it would be great to hear what the working group thinks about that. This is a tax that's collected on vacant units, not every vacant unit. There are some exemptions to this, but rental apartments where the units are empty, it wouldn't really be something that would apply to vacant single family homes or homes that are occupied for a couple of months of the year. But there are a large number of homes in the county that are sitting vacant, and this is really both a way to generate revenue and disincentivize leaving those units off the market. So last slide, just to say that we are working to have a draft housing element out in a month, and it's actually it seems like not too far away. It isn't too far away. It's later than we wanted. We were hoping to get it out sooner than this. I think we all saw the need to do additional outreach and spent a lot of the summer, thanks to Alexis and Liz and Allie, doing a lot of additional follow-up and focus groups and stakeholder meetings and our workshops to get that additional outreach. And we intend to submit this to the state in October. We will get their comments back in January and revise and adopt the element at the beginning of next year. With that, I'm going to stop, and the rest of the meeting is all yours. And we would love to hear from you about your thoughts. The original idea was to go topic by topic. I think that we would be hard pressed to do that in an hour and 5 minutes. And so I think what we really want to do is just hear more generally from working group members about what you'd like to see us flesh out on each of these topic areas. And we can come back to the individual topics depending on how this goes. But I see Amy's hand up, and we can start there, and then we'll go to Lorenzo and playing this by ear a little bit. Thanks.
I thought I'd ask about AB 1482. I can't help but wonder how many renters know about it. And so my suggestion is that there be some sort of an educational piece that goes out to renters. I'm not quite sure how that would happen, but just today I was hearing about someone, every year their rent goes up, $300, and it just is, they can depend upon it. So I'm wondering if people know about it and if they know the process to appeal that or to draw attention to landlords who are not following the law.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. That's a good point. And it's also awareness of the rent mediation program too, because there's AB 1482, but there's also this opportunity that the city has created for landlord and tenant to have mediation services provided. In certain instances, I don't know how well that's being used right now. Or Alexis, if you have any information on the work is being done by a third party, but I don't have data on how many applications have been filed and so forth.
So I guess
around that.
I just wanted to follow up by saying that it seems to me that that housing staff might consider how best to get the word out in general to tenants. It's one thing to call a meeting and have 75 people show up, but think how many renters there are in this city and how much there is to know, so you get a fair shake in, let's say, rent increases. We better understand how to maneuver through, landlords can be pretty intimidating, and do people know where to turn? So I guess I'm wondering if housing could find a better way of being there for tenants in that regard. Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, I see Lorenzo and then John and then Joanne. Go ahead, Lorenzo.
Just a couple of quick questions and points. At the beginning, you had a slide acknowledging the success or some of the things that occurred in 2015. And so my question would be, are those things sustainable? What's been the long-term impact, effect, what worked? that created some of those successes. So that's one. And then in the opportunity slides, I don't know if I saw opportunities and what potentially are you doing about those particular opportunities? And so that was 2. And then 3, these are just general questions. You had a conversation around options, and one was encouraging residents to apply for some creative down payment. And you used the word "we." So I don't know who the "we" is, because obviously typically the owner or prospective buyer is going to a mortgage broker or a realtor. And how would they know about those particular products or opportunities to suggest to the potential homeowners or buyers? So I'm not sure how that's being socialized to the potential homeowners. And then third or fourth would be, you mentioned assisting owners who are aging in place. We're assisting owners who are aging in place. Again, using the word "we," how is that getting directly to those individuals? Because there's a gap in terms of communication. So I'm not quite sure how the "we" is transferring down to those who actually can get that information. So just several of my thoughts.
Yeah, those are great observations, and I'm not sure I can respond completely to all of them, but I will say when I'm using the word "we," it's synonymous with the city of San Rafael.
So when you say that, then my listing is, what's the mechanism that the "we" from the city is doing to socialize to that broad? Because that's a meaty agenda in terms of this is what we are doing. So I'm stuck on that a little bit.
And in some cases, it's the county of Marin that's offering the service, and we are really acting more as a referral to programs and resources that are being made available at the county level or at the Marin Housing or other organizations in the community. But I think the point of what is the city's role in this and how can we best describe that and maybe improve it is really important to the conversation.
Yes, and measure.
Right.
Can
Thank
I
you.
just jump in something, Barry, and just add to it? Thank you, Lorenzo, for bringing that up. Really good observations. That kind of collective "we" was a good question, but the other one is, how are we getting that information out to our communities, to our residents, to those whose policies that we directly affect, right? That's another kind of a "we" thing. There's people don't always know whether it's a city or a county or this housing and stuff. It's complicated, right? So I think your question is a good one. And I know that the city, we, the county, they, and all these other entities are looking to all of that kind of in a much more collective way. And I've heard that from some of you on this group too, right? We need to tap into and recognize that there are other entities that have these resources. How can we better partner and collaborate to get that information out? Because, as you said, great programs, but if nobody knows about it, what good work have you got? So I appreciate that, and I go ahead.
It directly speaks to equity, right? So
Absolutely.
Those who need it perhaps aren't getting the resources to take advantage versus those who have the resources or the contacts or the referrals. They're first out of the gate with it.
And those who, to what Omar was saying in the beginning, right? Those who are directly affected by these policies and programs aren't even often at the table, and yet they are directly affected by those policies based on decisions that are being made, kind of in spite of it. So I hear all that, and I think we've acknowledged that in parts of our housing element. And I think just on a really ground level, I think we all through this housing element process has recognized that that's very important.
Yes, thank you. Let's go with John and then Joanne.
Okay, great. Thank you. As I've mentioned a number of times during these meetings, I'm a huge advocate of more family units in single family home neighborhoods, specifically for the purpose of desegregating the community. And I was happy to hear you mention, Barry, that the city's going to be working on like architectural requirements for developments outside of the downtown, similar to what you mentioned we did for the precise plan. I think that's it's going to go a long way to sort of like assuage the concerns that people have in the single family home neighborhoods about multifamily developments not fitting in. So, but I'll note that I don't think that there was a specific call out for more multifamily units in the single family home neighborhoods. Is that something that you think is feasible, or?
I think we need to distinguish between 2 and 3 and 4 unit buildings and what most people think of as multifamily, which is apartment buildings. So those little, duplex, triplex, fourplex type units, yes, I think under SB 9 and under other zoning provisions, there will be more opportunities. You really couldn't build multifamily apartment buildings or condominium buildings that are significant in size in the single family neighborhoods unless they're on sites that are zoned for multifamily or medium density at least uses. There's of course the opportunity to rezone and do general plan amendments to do that, but that's difficult. I mean, that requires an environmental review. And so I think small is okay, but those larger scale developments are, they're more challenging. There are multifamily sites in single family neighborhoods that are underdeveloped. So there are those opportunities. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. And that actually brings me to my next comment. That's about you mentioned the community land trusts. I love that idea. I also wonder if some of the school districts could participate in the community land trusts. They have a lot of land out in the single family home neighborhoods. And I'll just kind of go down the list. I know that it would take a long time for you to comment on each one of these, but I really liked the condo conversion idea you mentioned, and also the acquisition and the rehabilitation program, and converting older hotels to apartments and condos, affordable housing. I think it would be great to experiment with that home sharing program that you mentioned. And yeah, if we can get a regional housing bond, that would be great. The vacancy tax, I think, is a great idea. I will tell you finally that I have a friend who is an attorney for landlords who participates in the mandatory mediation program frequently. And he said it's not working for the renters, that the landlords will bring in attorneys like him and they'll basically just bowl over the renters who can't afford attorneys. And the mediators can't represent the renters because they're mediators, right? And so, yeah, personally, I feel that's not working. So I wanted to ask you what the city and what people and what you've observed with the effect of or the benefits or negative effects of rent control, because it seems like for a lot of cities, there's a direct connection between increase in housing values, like prices, that then cause rent increases, which then cause evictions, which then cause homelessness. And it seems like, to me, rent control is the best way to alleviate that. But I've also heard horror stories. But what's your perspective? It's too loaded a question for me to just answer like that. But I mean,
Sorry.
I think the state in passing AB 1482 was making an effort to address the problem in kind of a moderate way. And I think that's really the question is, did they go far enough? Do the protections that they've given renters under that law work? And, that's a 5% annual increase plus cost of living, not to exceed 10% in a given year. So that's state law now. I mean, I have heard folks say that just cause for eviction is really even more critical of an issue. They're tied together. And I mean, I may defer to some of the other members of the working group to weigh in on your question, John, because I think there are really strong emotions on both sides of that question. And I see the positives and the negatives that you described, but I'm not going to be the arbiter on this. It's also a political question for
Yeah.
the council to decide on and hear from the community on. So,
Mhm.
uh,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, yeah, and I actually wasn't familiar with that new law, so thank you for telling me about it.
Mhm.
When does that go into effect?
it's in effect now.
Okay,
Yeah, it was,
I'll do some research on that.
it's okay.
And then just my last and final thought is just in general, I like the idea of, we don't really know what's going to work, it seems, you know. We could do a lot, we've done a lot of research as precedent, and these are all really great ideas, but in my opinion, I think it would be cool to like try them all, actually, if we can, and just see what works, and just sort of like, you know, calibrate and you know, edit the portfolio of solutions in a couple of years to see, to keep the ones that are effective, and you know, cast away the ones that are not. I don't know if that's feasible.
Great. Thanks, John.
Sure.
Let's go with Joanne and then Linda and then Amy.
Great, thanks, Barry. So I would say that prior to 2019, maybe even 2018, the political will in San Rafael to build more housing didn't exist. And the state needed to mandate and create all of these new legislations in order for local jurisdictions to build the housing. But we currently have a pro-housing council and a city staff that completely understands the need to build housing, and all of the policies that were stated, you know, whether it was a downtown precise plan, reducing the inclusionary requirement, ADU streamlining, changes to the project review process, are all moving it forward. And now, even since the pandemic, we have many projects in the pipeline. So what I don't want to see is new policies that restrict that. I think we need to embrace the existing policies and give them time to work. They are working. We're going to have policies come on board. In 2019, I think that was the year, Barry, you referred to the housing report that Paul Jensen did that identified the obstacles. And council has been very good and staff has been awesome at addressing those obstacles. So I think we need to give those policies a chance to work, which leads me into rent control, which is the third rail. I'm really concerned that if City of San Rafael does engage in, increasing, going above what the state mandate is in terms of rent control, that we're really going to discourage the new rental housing production. And then that's going to have growth stagnation. So I think it's a really important conversation to have. I was happy to hear that that the city is going to be reviewing that. It's not going to necessarily be in this housing element, because I do think that we need a lot more conversation about that. There's a lot of different opinions out there, but the intention is to increase housing production across all levels. We need to reach that threshold or we're going to be penalized for that. So I just wanted to say that. Relative to design standards, I think, you know, when you say compatible design standards, that word really bothers me and concerns me. I think the design standards need to be flexible and innovative. I'm totally agree with John. I would like to see more multifamily units built in single resident neighborhoods. What they look like, I don't know. I think that, you know, we can create those standards, but I think they still need to be flexible. In terms of increasing the housing supply, yes, on building city parking lots. The other one is we have a lot of parking that is not owned by the city, a lot of private lots out there. Perhaps there's some sort of arrangement or incentive for building over those lots as well. The office to housing conversion, there are a lot of office parks out in Terra Linda which are being underutilized. I don't know what the future of office space is going to be. I mean, some say it's never coming back. However, can they be second story? Can we build housing above them? Can they be a live-work situation? Home sharing idea. Oh my God, that is so great. We are house rich. There are so many homes, very large homes in San Rafael that have one occupant in it. I love the idea of multi-generational housing. And the tax on vacant housing. I want to make sure I'm clear. Did you say, Barry, that it was on single family residences that the tax? No.
It's usually not. No,
Yeah.
they're usually exempt. Oakland has a vacancy tax that I know that it doesn't apply to single family homes.
Okay, so I would love to know what the inventory is, We just did a tour of the city of Centerville on Monday with the Economic Development Department. You know, how many vacant homes are there? How many vacant rental units are there? I think that inventory would be really important. And then relative to building and commercial zoning, the commercial zoning, much of it, our industrial land in the city of Centerville is the only place where a lot of services exist in our entire county. And if those services didn't exist, then those people would be going to the East Bay for those services. So I really caution against building too much housing in those industrial areas, and also preserving our much precious commercial space here in the city. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Joanne. And I will add that we're not proposing housing in any of the industrial areas.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a little area near Davidson School on Jordan and Lindaro over there where the zoning allows for live work. But other than that, there's really nothing in the industrial zones. And there are some folks who want us to change that, but
I know.
okay.
Thank you.
Great. And Linda, I saw your hand up next.
Yeah, well, I might be one of those, although Joanne, I've always said it's got to be no net loss of the current commercial use. You could add the housing on top, but no net loss. You know, I was in London in the summer and I saw a pretty high-end hotel with the gas station on the ground floor. You drove in like a garage, you filled up and headed out. And I thought we're just so provincial in our country about how putting uses together and being able to maximize the land for housing and for mixed use. So the question I have to start off with, we had 388 units permitted. A fair number of them are ADUs, that's all good. But of the ones that were in apartment buildings, there was only one that I know of that was built, and that was on B Street, the Parker Monahan building. So why weren't the other ones built? And if they weren't built, they're going to have a new building code, a good green building code to build to starting January. Do they all know that? I hope they do, but the expenses are going to go up for that construction. And it might not be in their pro forma that they did initially, that they still haven't built it. So I just think that in addition to what Joanne said and looking at what Paul Jensen did with his analysis, is what do those unbuilt projects have to say? Because it doesn't do you much good if they're not built. So I've got a few here. Maintaining housing, health, safety, and quality. To me, it's about climate change. And in the site analysis, we should be showing whether it's in wildfire areas or areas subject to potential sea level rise and climate impact concerns. So that's really upfront in the housing sites analysis. In the design standards that we have, we should be looking to the kind of trees that Amy was talking about, awnings over walkways, and designing for shade in the design guidelines in dealing with climate change. Increasing housing supply. This is the crux of it. You know, it doesn't matter. You could buy all the apartments and make them affordable to low income without increasing housing units. We're not going to be seeing a way out of the crisis that we're in. So we need by right. Projects apply, they get approved by right. There is currently some use permit requirements on some multifamily and mixed use, I believe, and that should be taken off. We say we encourage SROs, but encouraging is more than just having it allowed in the zoning ordinance. The Homeward Bound project development has SROs in it. It's a kind of an extravagant SRO model compared to some others that have been built. But what else can we do to encourage SROs? Because those are really what will help the lowest income renters who are single or couples to have a place to live that's affordable. And we haven't had any built except for this one particular model. ADUs, I know we can't claim very many, but I think we should have an aggressive program on it. 33, it used to be 25% of the housing in Vancouver, Canada had an ADU. It's now increased to 33%. That would translate to 4,000 ADUs in San Rafael. So you can imagine if we had 4,000 ADUs, what a difference that would make. That's about 250 a year. So I think we need to really, really be aggressive in what we can do with ADUs and have smooth the way, not block the way. Housing on city parking lots, absolutely. We have to walk the talk. And CEQA streamlining, it's a great idea. There's plenty in there for CEQA exemptions for infill development, so we need to be using that. Great stuff for first-time homeowners, options on low-income rentals. So just concerned that the emphasis on acquiring existing housing is important to do, but it should not come at the cost of new construction of low and moderate income units. So maybe there's a need for some percentage of the money to be protected, to go. The most money should go to be building new units, because if there aren't new units, we're not going to be out of the mess that we're in. And there's also a concern that I just want to raise, as if market rate apartments become owned by nonprofits, they come off the tax rolls. And that has impacts on the education funding in the San Rafael High School District, for San Rafael High School, and for Miller Creek Elementary District. And so to the extent that that is maybe a new, a very high priority program and be implemented soon, I would encourage you to talk to the business officials at both districts about this program to understand the anticipated impacts. And I know Mayor Kate has been talking to the districts, but this has not come up. So this is an important item to raise, so there's no surprises to the school districts. Encouraging for older adults, we say we encourage retrofits. I'm not sure what that means, other than saying, here's the building code and you can do something. Sausalito has I think it's a grant program to help low income, not people who can afford it, but low income homeowners and renters be able to retrofit. And that makes a huge difference for people. They're not expensive, but it makes a difference. And then it may be encouraging co-housing by right. We say we have a strong policy for it, but it doesn't mean anything. We haven't had any built since I first wrote that zoning thing in 1992. So I think we need to see what co-housing advocates would like to see in it. And I appreciate the strong support for housing for older adults. I just had yet another debate with an older adult who said we don't need any more housing for older adults. And actually you don't hear that from about any other population group. So I just appreciate the strong support in the housing element for this one group, where people think, well, we don't need anything. We don't need that. And then finally, on potential funding sources. So redevelopment law required back in the day that 20% of tax increment in redevelopment areas go to affordable housing. And this could be a self-application by the city of San Rafael, that when there's a tax increment coming into the city, that 20% of that goes toward the city's housing fund. And this would really provide a stable, growing flow of revenue and be a commitment by the city council to housing. And yeah, a tax on vacant units. I think there's we don't, it kind of, some of it might be inheritance law challenges, but we don't want people who inherit property who don't live here just sitting on it. We want the housing occupied, and if it's not occupied, it needs to be, I need to pay for the kind of support that's needed to make sure the house stays good. And finally, the unintended consequences of rent control. I think the state law was a good start at trying to come up with something reasonable that would work for everybody. But once the city creates a bureaucracy to deal with it, an institution, it'll never go away. It'll always be an expense to the city, and we just have to be careful. So I want to be sure. This proposal came forward. There was talk about a crowd. Huge crowd from the Canal neighborhood and from Latinos who are renting and low income across the city. And Joanne, you might have been around for this in like 2004, 5. It was the rising rents workshops that we had, and we filled B Street. We filled the advocates filled B Streets with people who are going through renting crisis. And the city agreed at that time to track rents and to monitor it. And all that stopped with the downturn in the economy in 2008. But that might need to come back. So we have a real documentation of the need and the rents that are going up, and being able to help people. And then the last one is somehow there has to be some mention of the people who sublease and are renting a room in an apartment and are really vulnerable to self-evict or to be exploited by somebody who is managing renting out rooms. I don't see, and we need to have a mention and track that if we can. Thanks so much for all your work. I think the workshop I went to was great. And I know there's a lot in this housing element. I just hope we can push it forward and be aggressive, a little more aggressive would be good.
Great. Thank you, Linda. I think next is Don, and then Amy and Omar.
I had a few questions combined with some comments. And the first was a comment. I don't know what the intended use of the PowerPoint images were, but I was actually quite concerned about the image that was used with the slide policies and programs for 2023 to 2031. It had the big Soviet era block, cheek to jowl, and it was the kind of place that I immediately reacted, that's not the kind of place I would actually like to live. And I think there are ways to show high density housing in a more attractive, more mixed kind of setting than these just block by block, huge, all the same height buildings. So I would suggest you not use that image either in the housing element or whatever the other intended use might be. I did have concerns about the revised schedule, and that it looks now like Santa Fe, which is the jurisdiction in the county that is probably most likely to get HCD approval and has the most options in terms of meeting the RHNA housing needs, is pushing right up against the state deadline. I mean, now if the housing element isn't submitted until late September, and then the HCD takes their 90-day review, and they typically come back with extensive comments that the city would have to respond to and then go through public hearings. It's going to be well beyond the January 31st deadline before the city has an adopted housing element. I know there are two different steps in there. One is April and the other is January, but it's not clear to me what the penalties are if you don't make the January 31st deadline, which under the current schedule, I don't see how it's going to be possible to do that and hold hearings at the Planning Commission and at the City Council before a plan's adopted. The next thing that struck me in the presentation was the historic rate of growth. And as Linda indicated, it seems like there have been a lot more projects approved than are actually showing up as being built. Over the 6-year period, the rate was 55 units a year. We have to increase that 800% over the remainder of this cycle in order to comply with the RHNA. And I just don't really understand fully why some of the projects that have been approved haven't been built, and how we're ever going to increase 8-fold the number of new units built over between now and 2031. In terms of the exploring the option of condo conversions, I think there's a real balancing there, because back in the 70s, when condo conversions first became popular and most jurisdictions cracked down on them, what was happening is the bigger, relatively more affordable apartment buildings were being rehabbed and converted to relatively more expensive condominiums. Why a lot the relatively more affordable housing, not below market rate housing, but relatively more affordable housing was actually being lost. And rental housing is the lowest rung on the ladder. So if you can't afford a down payment, can't make the monthly payments, your other option is rental housing. So I think it's real important that we don't go overboard in terms of encouraging conversions. I think it may be appropriate in some cases where the target can be existing residents, but that's very difficult to do, particularly if a project's going to be rehabbed. And then I am concerned that with these policies encouraging and facilitating new housing development, that we may not be getting the below market rate housing that we really want. And an example is there is a project pending on the corner of Grand and 4th. It's 35 units, 3 below market rate units and 32 market rate units, with a 6-story building sitting right on the line on Grand in the neighborhood. And it'd be one thing if you're getting some public benefits from a project like that. But I just see a lot of market rate housing and 22 parking spaces for 35 units because it's within close proximity to transit. I'm just afraid we're going to see more examples of that, not getting significant below market rate housing and encouraging a lot more above market rate and above market rate and above moderate income housing, which is not what we really need. And finally, I'm curious whether any changes have been made to the opportunity site list. We talked about that last time. I think Linda and I both raised concerns about the huge number of units in excess of the RHNA that were shown on that map. And at the county, we were actually told that anything on the list under the current rules, if they're in effect at the next cycle, actually become by right. And there could be huge risk if there are properties that really aren't that appropriate for development that could become by right in the next cycle of the housing element. So I'm curious whether there's been any adjustment to the number of sites, particularly the ones who were added just because they're vacant or underdeveloped at that point. Those were my questions.
Thanks, Don. And I will attempt to respond to some of the points you just brought up because there are a lot of important things that you raised. The schedule, I wanted to talk, I may come back to the schedule at the end. There are, I would say, a very large number of jurisdictions now that are saying we're aiming for a later adoption because the state is allowing 120 days beyond January 31st for certification. So that's May 31st. And so we do have additional time. We're still trying to get this adopted as fast as we can. The realistic production points you made, I think, are very well taken. And it would be a stretch to increase production and also to provide affordable units at the quantity that we're expected to without additional funding to do that. The condo conversion issue, I think there are limits in the ordinance that you can only do a condo conversion when the rental vacancy rate is above a certain level. So I think that's a little bit of a safeguard there that we would not be taking units off the rental market and converting them to condos if we had a exceptionally low vacancy rate for rentals. The list, the opportunity site list has shrunk since what you saw. We have removed a lot of the single family zoned sites. We didn't need them to meet the RHNA. They can still be developed with single family housing, but we are not putting them on the list as opportunity sites. So, and that was actually, I think, about 50 or 60 sites out of the 188 that we originally brought to you. So the number of sites is really focused more on multifamily housing sites. And areas where there's a project in the pipeline or a project that's been proposed that's active. So yes, that's an important point. Yeah, I think those are the key points I wanted to just respond to right now. And I see a couple other hands up. Linda, before we go on to the next, did you have a clarifying point?
I looked at the PowerPoint and I think the large building you're talking about, Don, is actually Vivillon. And it might just be the angle of it from the street there, but it's actually a pretty well-designed building. It is going to be 7 stories, but it's all affordable for low-income older people and people with disabilities. So I just wanted to say, hold on judgment until you see it clad and ready to go.
Well, I was going to say, I've seen the drawings for that building and I think it is attractive. I think it's the presentation that I guess shows the BioMarin buildings beyond it that create this long row of big buildings on a street with no cars on it.
Right. Okay, thank you, Don. And we're going to go to Amy and then Omar and then Daniel.
Thank you. Before I go into anything in detail, I just want to emphasize how important I think it is for tenants, for new residents, for landlords, for everyone who's involved with housing to have an accessible housing webpage here in the city of San Rafael, something all similar to like All About Housing, where you could have a personalized description of what is a code complaint or how do you file a code complaint? And you could click on even, a video in Spanish and English so that people understand how to do it and how to follow up on it. It's very difficult to get the kind of usable information that people need to maintain safety in their house or in their neighbor's house, to be able to take advantage of programs that are out there for, for supplemental, income for rent, and also even basic fair housing rules. I don't think you should have to go onto a federal website to learn about fair housing. I really think it would be beneficial to everyone in the city of San Rafael if after the housing element is passed and the dust is settled, that we create housing, what it's all about in San Rafael, and every single last issue, all the programs have some sort of an easily accessible, not words, but like a video showing what it's like to go in, to the city. I think that would make a real difference. And fair housing should be part of the fabric of our city. Everybody should be on the alert for that, for fair housing practices. It shouldn't come to you being discriminated against that you have to fight for fair housing. If we all believe in fair housing for the city, it's the law, but it's also all of our responsibilities. I think you have much better compliance. So, I'm looking at a way of bringing this all together that isn't words, but that's practice. So that's my suggestion. Yeah, and another thing that feeds into that is, honestly, I don't think we have so many code enforcers. I went on the website. First of all, you can't find, the staff you can find is very limited. I don't believe we have a lot of people out there to help residents if they have complaints about their housing or if they're having a situation with the landlord. It's my experience, and I'm pretty well versed in using city website, is that it requires a huge amount of follow-up, a pretty large amount of literacy. You have to know the right people to call. You have to, do a lot of emailing in order to get results. It shouldn't have to be that way in the city. We should be much, much more accessible. The other thing is we've talked, I think that Linda mentioned in our brainstorming session last time, right, Linda, hotel tax. You said something about that. And I'm not sure if money could be funneled from a hotel tax that would go into affordable housing also. It might be a source of income. Not an additional hotel tax, but part of the hotel tax that's there. So yeah, increased staff, have a much better educational resource at the city. And for those who are not tech savvy, you have some sort of you go into City Hall and you have boards that light up, you press, code complaint, and it's in Spanish and it's in English, and you understand the pathways, how to get action. And And then the last thing, I remember, Barry, there being a discussion about, not wanting to build developments too far away from amenities. Is that state law? Meaning groceries and stuff like that?
Well, it's more about what you need to qualify for tax credits and other financing programs and grants, the proximity to those amenities.
All right.
Yeah.
So my suggestion is for some of these larger sites, be they office buildings or, parking lots, that we've got like 3 grocery stores that really have the whole neighborhood, the whole city sewn up. It'd be wonderful if there's a new development and let's say an old office building or an old parking lot that would include, a corner grocery store, that would include whatever amenities would make life just like the students at Laurel Dell. They want a place to call home. People who live in a development, it's enough that you're living closer to your neighbors than you would be if you lived in a single family or a duplex. But to be able to not have to cross dangerous streets and go to the probably the most ridiculous part of our whole city is where Whole Foods and Trader Joe's and then Safeway is pretty scary. Some sort of a grocery store that would go along with a housing development of a certain size, amenities, right? If you have laundry machines, you should be able to buy something that isn't from a convenience store that's overpriced and unhealthy. I think that's something else, as far as fair housing, having it become part of the fiber of our community. How does that happen? Education, obviously, word of mouth, but it really should be more than that. So I would just throw this back at the housing staff and say, how can this be part of our city? Front and center. You shouldn't have to be a civil rights lawyer to know about fair housing and what it means. And so I was thinking, could there be like job recruitment fairs that the city would sponsor that would bring in fair housing, I don't know, builders advocates, something like that, so that so that people would understand that we're a nexus of that. That's part of who we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Omar and then Daniel.
Thank you, Barry. I just want to recognize that we heard very loud and clear during the meeting of August, and not just in the meeting of August, really for a long time, the need for policies to protect tenants. So thank you for including tenant protection measures and fair housing measures to meet the needs of low-income residents and also to respond to the state requirements, right? Because right now it's not even an option for us to choose to do it or not. So I really appreciate the fact that we are recognizing that. Also, I want to acknowledge the fact that you guys are recognizing that most of the new housing plan is market rate and will not be affordable for low-income households. So thank you for also calling this out. I think it's very important for us to guide the next conversations on the need of tenant protections and on the need to come out with more creative solutions to produce housing that's affordable for everyone. And here's a personal belief that in order to achieve that and to create and to implement these recommendations that you guys have identified, we really need an evolution of today's real estate industry, policymakers, investors, lenders, tenants, contractors. I think we really need to create a new way to work together because that is the existing ecosystem around development has created and contributed directly to the crisis that we have now. So trying to think that we're gonna have different outcomes by operating and working in the same way is really setting up this plan for failure and continue making housing a problem for everyone. So I do encourage the city of San Rafael to be a leader in this innovation and creating the space for all these parties to come together to find innovative solutions to build housing in our city. And I agree. So rent control, I know it's political, it's controversial, and I won't pretend saying that that is the solution for all the problems. I think alone it won't work. But I do think that if it's a piece of a bigger strategy, I think it worked. I think it works. And to make it less political and less controversial, I think we need to bring transparency to the process, right? I think it's important for all of us to know who owns the land. You know, we need to have an ordinance to really unpack ownership of all those shell companies. They are hiding their identity to buy this property, especially the multifamily complex. The Canal neighborhood is the neighborhood that faced the most change ownership on properties than any other neighborhood in the city of San Rafael. And every time the ownership changes, increases go up, and start putting pressure on tenants to self-evict first. We have right now a 400 Canal building that was purchased by a corporation and immediately changed property management, start sending letters to tenants, and we have hundreds of families right now that are going to be on the streets. So in one way, the county and the city invest so many resources on homelessness. And here we have for the lack of protections for tenants, especially in these big complexes. This creating more, displacing people to the streets. That doesn't make sense to me. So I was saying, rent control perhaps is not the solution to the housing crisis that we have, but it can discourage these huge hedge funds. We are a property owner in the Canal. We are trying to buy more properties to contribute to the strategy that the city has, you know, in preservation. I had to remind everyone that the Canal is not low-income housing. There's low-income families living in market rate housing. So our strategy is to acquire properties to rehabilitate them because they have terrible conditions, and then convert them into affordable housing. But every time the one property goes to the market, we get priced out in seconds, because we are dealing now to not just regional hedge funds, international hedge funds. They are coming and buying single family homes, multifamily buildings, any type of housing is being acquired. So I would love to have some ordinance to require owners of properties to transparent the ownership so that we can see, is this actually a mom and pop landlord? Because that's actually part of the controversy, that we bring the mom and pop landlord to the front and center of the conversation. Is that really a mom and pop landlord? Also, what is the definition of mom and pop landlord? How many units the person has to own to be considered a mom and pop landlord, right? So I think we need to bring transparency to have those conversations so they become less controversial. Also, we need to recognize when we talk about rent control, we're not talking about single family homeowners. So most of the time, these are the groups that come to the settings to fight rent control, even though it might not even apply to them. So again, bringing transparency and clarity so that we can have a conversation, and more focused conversation. We're not talking about the mom and pop lord. They actually need the return of the investment to survive. We're talking about huge corporations that have no connections with San Rafael, no connections with the county. They are using the lobby teams to come and put pressure on elected officials to actually make rent control politically controversial. Right? So we need to accept the fact what type of city do we want to build, and stop this conversation around will never happen in Marin County. Well, I don't think we can. That's not an argument that we can continue having, because it will happen in Marin County, like it to Marin County on their own terms, or pressure by the state of California because it's coming. The housing crisis is way beyond our control, and we cannot continue ignoring that. So again, I believe that we need to have a clear understanding of who owns the land, who is a mom and pop landlord, and then come up with a more focalized interventions to control the rent on low-income families. Joanne, you know this very well. The Latino community, the low-income tenants, are the workforce of many of the businesses in San Rafael. So if they get displaced out of San Rafael, it's going to be more expensive for them to come and work, and all of us are going to get hurt. So I really appreciate the city continue elevating the importance of tenant protections, of fair housing measures, because it benefits everyone. But I do agree with Joanne, it's political, it's controversial, and it's that because it has the wrong narrative. And we all are having this conversation without clear definitions. Who is the properties that we're talking about? I'm talking about the multifamily buildings where low-income residents live. Those are the properties that I would love to have a conversation around rent control, because they are the ones increasing the rents more than any other property in San Rafael. And larger buildings are actually displacing people at a larger rate than mom and pop landlords. So anyway, I feel that I'm really grateful for the work so far, but it cannot just be in paper. You really have to translate to clear actions, and we can start really understanding who owns our land, because it depends on them what we can do and not do. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. Yeah, really excellent observations there. Okay, Daniel, you're the last one with your hand up. I think after you, we may have a couple more minutes, and then we're going to have to move to our final items. So why don't you go ahead, Daniel?
Thanks. First wanted to say thank you to staff for all the time you put into this. I wanted to just, well, mirror a lot of what Linda said and add to it a little bit and recognize some of the things that she said. I do look forward to seeing a lot of what the policy actually looks like. Saying a streamlined process is good. I, again, am curious to see what that will actually look like, and want to double down on the comment earlier about by right zoning and stress just the importance of having a clear set of goals to overcome and not being at the whim of just 1,000 inputs. It decreases the cost of housing so tremendously much. Just wanted to stress that fact again. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. The other thing that I wanted to highlight, God, sorry, I can't find that note.
Hey, Daniel, can I
Yeah.
jump in for a second? I'm
Yes.
really curious in terms of, Dawn had asked some really good questions about projects that were entitled but weren't built. And then also he gave the example of the SB 35 project on the corner of, God, I think it's Grand and 4th, where it's only 3 affordable units. And I wanted to know if you kind of wanted to elaborate on like the cost of that. I mean, it's the margins are so thin and financing is really, really difficult. And I know in previous meetings, you have talked at length about that.
Well, I did find my note, so that's a good thing,
Okay,
but I
great.
will jump to that. Again, every development is unique, so I can't really sit here and tell you the exact reasons why something moves forward or doesn't. I would say the 3 units in a building that are affordable is a reflection of the existing inclusionary housing policy. So I don't think that's exactly 10%, but they may have paid an in lieu fee for the rest of it. I'm not quite sure what happened. So that is what the policy currently is. You know, as an affordable developer, I certainly support usually higher inclusionary fees, but I know that's something that's changed recently. And I won't really comment on that further, but you know, if some portion of that was paid to in lieu as an in lieu fee, then hopefully that's going to a future development down the road. And again, I don't know what that was specifically. I can say about the housing that has stalled out though, and I, you know, I can't tell you why that is, but I'm guessing timing is a factor in that. And again, things in the economy change so rapidly, things in affordable housing policy change so rapidly, and policy in general change so rapidly that the more reliability of a time frame that you can work on getting this through is so incredibly beneficial to actually getting housing built, both market rate and affordable housing. And I don't know if that touched on all the questions you had, But I just wanted to add that, as the city is adopting these policies, and I don't know if there's been any talk by the city staff on this, but you should really look into what it takes to become a pro-housing city for HCD. HCD has a new designation of a pro-housing city. I was one of the first people to use it on a project I was working on in another jurisdiction, and it actually gives you bonus points on applications. So it's a new tool that they're trying to use to, again, this time it's more of a carrot than a stick, but to incentivize jurisdictions for building or adopting these pro-housing policies. And I got bonus points on my last tax credit application, which I submitted 2 weeks ago, that I wouldn't have otherwise. So it is something, as you're adopting these policies, to see how they align with this, especially in a city that, doesn't have a housing bond, and, getting as many state resources to the city as possible is going to be key to provide any sort of amount of housing needed to reach this goal, right? You're not San Francisco, Oakland, LA, Sacramento, right? There aren't these housing bonds, and you're going to have to rely on a lot of outside funding to get this done. So to the extent that you can align the actual policies that you've mentioned with the state, you should do that and then try to incorporate it in this to get this designation, because it does help on these applications. And while it's a new program and only a few people can get it right now, more and more cities will be adopting it. So you'll fall farther and farther behind on the state level for applications, and thus, exacerbating the problem.
Thank you, Daniel. And I think we're going to add a new housing program now to become a pro-housing city. Program 71, as if we didn't have enough already. No, thank you. That's really, no, that's actually really, really good information. Before we go to our closing items, I wanted to see Diana and Rena. Did you want to add anything? Diana, you joined a little late, and Rena, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything before we close.
No, I'm fine, and I'm sorry I was so late. I had a family issue I needed to take care of.
No worries at all. And Rena.
Hi, I just want to say, thank you for putting all this information. I'm new to all of this and learning with all of you, but one of the main things I wanted to be here is because of, I wanted to I'm glad you guys are gonna continue working on the tenants protection, especially since everything is so high right now with inflation, and how we're gonna protect more of the renters. Increasing is a big issue, and I just want to see more programs, a limitation to control the rent, which is essential in general, because I actually, one of the John talked about a lawyer in mediation, and problem is it's not helping the renters, because I had neighbors who had issues with the renters, and all of us, we have to help. So to prevent they get evicted. So we need more programs like that in the city of San Rafael that is equitable for all of us, and in the way that is, we need to continue that. We need to push it more. We need to outreach. We need to do more programs and be more visible in general for the city of San Rafael. It's a beautiful city, but it's not for everybody, because right now it's everything too expensive to afford, especially we have so many homeless that you can see a lot of seniors also who are homeless. And so what's the best way to create a good program and that limits and put the rent control, every year needs to have a limitation, or prevent that every single year being too expensive for everybody. So, and there's a lot of good ideas that I see that I agree with everyone, but mainly my topic was the rent and how we're going to be create more affordable housing that are going to be housing for everybody. that is gonna be affordable for everyone. We don't know yet. I'm hoping to see programs that we can all participate eventually, and we can continue providing more information to our neighbors, to our colleagues, to everybody. So the news is out there, so everybody can participate. That's all.
Great. Thank you, Rena. Thanks for that. Okay, so we are coming up to the closing hour of the meeting, and just wanted to say there are no public attendees, so we have no public comment in the final round. And the last item is member and staff announcements. This is the last meeting of the working group before the housing element is released as a draft. So we don't have a calendared meeting, but we don't want to say bye to all of you just yet. So what we would like to do is continue to retain you as a sounding board as we move forward with this. So stand by for more emails or directives on that. The ideas and the quality of the conversation that have come from these meetings has been phenomenal. It's really helped us so much in shaping the policies and programs and really looking at all of the different perspectives that go into the housing element. I want to just say we really have appreciated the feedback and input you've given us. And that's one of the reasons that I'm not saying this is our last meeting, you're all free to go now, thank you. But because I think we do want you to hang around for possibly, some future discussions on these topic areas, because it's a really good group. I think we did good when we put you guys together.
We did good.
Well,
So
you
thanks.
can't hold on to us indefinitely now, Barry.
No, I understand that, but we
know we're good, but
we just are appreciating you right now.
They might have to feed us if they want to keep hanging on to us, right, Lorenzo?
There you go.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll have to do a party. Okay, so be on the lookout for the draft housing element in about a month. And let me see if are there any member announcements before we adjourn? Anybody have anything they want to announce or go over? Okay, then.
No, I just have something real quick, and it's germane to this topic. And one of our development teams on a call reached out to myself and our DEI council today asking for support in a couple of cities that are opposing affordable housing in their community. And it's unfortunate because we need the homes in those communities. So just as a reminder that as developers, we still have a lot of oppositions to coming into communities that need affordable housing. And it's still a challenge from our development end. I'm sure Daniel can attest to that as well. So, and she pleaded with me, please, can you help us? Can you gather some folks? But we need help because we need these projects built for those communities.
Yeah, thank you, Lorenzo. And Linda, did you want to make
I
a closing
do.
comment?
No, not closing, but I thank you for Lorenzo for saying that, because it reminded me, the Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative and HCA, which stands for Housing Crisis Action, are putting on a summit Thursday, October 6th at 7 p.m. on Zoom. And we are going to be talking about housing elements and how to speak up. We're focusing in on creating new housing because we know there are some very good advocates focusing on some other aspects, but on what does it take to build it. And we have a philosopher and a planner and a developer each speaking. So that's Thursday, October 6th on Zoom. It'll be advertised, publicized through MEC and HCA. And Barry, I'll see about trying to get the flyer to you so you can send it out to the housing folks. And the whole goal is to help people have the words, Lorenzo, in support.
Thank you, Linda. And all of you will continue to receive emails from us prior to public hearings and other meetings where there's an opportunity to speak about the housing element and availability of the draft, certainly. So great. Is that a goodbye wave, Amy, or?
I think it is, Barry.
Okay, thanks.
It's
Thanks,
not a
everybody.
goodbye, it's an au revoir.
It's a see you later. Okay, thanks, everyone. Good
Bye.
night.
Thank you all for your input. Thank you so much.
Bye.